G'day and welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube for tonight's episode of WAFL Watch, where the WAFL Eagles were robbed in the dying minutes of a great contest with Peel Thunder in the wet at Lane Group Stadium. For today's episode, I'll be covering a brief overview of the match, who the best players were, including best AFL-listed talent, promising performances, and then our best WAFL-listed players. And then my key takeaways for the match before finally my predictions for who is pushing for a spot in the AFL side next week. So to get into the game, unfortunately for the second WAFL match in a row, the rain really impacted how clean the game could be. Just for the young Eagles to press their case for the AFL, probably not as easy when you're challenged by wet weather. Remember, there was a WAFL bye last weekend, so the last time the WAFL Eagles played was in a mud patch against West Perth as well. Today wasn't quite as bad as that game. In fact, the rain held out in the first quarter at least. And I even saw Tom Gross, I think, successfully take a bounce through the centre square during that period, but it was definitely a lot colder. We looked pretty even in the first half in particular and managed to push within a point early in the third before that seemed to set off something. And Peel went on to kick, I think, 4 straight in response. So while the game was weather affected, the handling of the footy was a lot better than expected. It just wasn't perfect. It really looked like Peel won the game off the back of a handful of exceptional efforts from their top tier players at that stage. Will Brodie and Quinton Narkle had ridiculous possession counts. I think Will Brodie had collected 17 in the first quarter alone, and then both mids finished with 41 disposals each. At our end, Tom Gross was our one-man army for the first 3 quarters. He was at the centre of every contest, even pushing forward and hitting the scoreboard late in the third, at a point where Peel were all over us, so just after that 4-goal burst. He got good support from Hamish Davies, Campbell Chesser, Jaden Hunt, and Shannon Lacasson as well from the WAFL-listed players. So despite the big numbers from the Star Thunder mids, we did actually managed to hold off from being completely run over across that part of the ground. There was a massive charge also in the fourth quarter, with Gross just adding 2 disposals, but he did kick his second goal of the game up forward during that period. And then both sides drew level for what was a real finals-like 5-minute period before there was an absolute robbery when Peel's key forward took a knee as he grabbed the ball to draw a high tackle, and the umpire rewarded him for that effort. I thought that was out of the game, but he managed it and then slotted a goal, and there was really no time left after that. So it was a bit of a disappointing finish for us, but a great effort from a WAFL Eagles side that had 14 AFL-listed players, as well as a notable debutant, which I will touch on later. So looking at our best players, Tom Gross was our standout today. For a guy who's 18 and doesn't actually have the man-child build of some 18-year-olds, I think I've already compared like what I'm talking about with like Daniel Rich and Shannon Hearn and Matt Rowell. You know, they might have been 18, but they really came into the AFL like men. Gross is not that, and he's an absolute contested beast against the senior bodies in the WAFL anyway. I know I've said this before, but for someone his size and with his early conditioning to be as damaging in the middle of packs, he's going to have so much upside when he bulks up in the weights room over summer, which I have absolutely no doubt he will do given the way that he chooses to play. He racked up 23 by the end of the game, which was on the back of a really quiet final quarter. Like I said, he had 2 then, so he had 21 by 3-quarter time. But across the course of the match, he just took to the contact all day. He really does it in the same way that Zach Butters does. And I'm not saying that makes him a plays-like comparison to Zach Butters, but there's just not many guys in the AFL that seem to actually thrive off bash and crash of AFL footy the way that those 2 guys do. So that was the comparison I saw, just the way he pummeled himself through the contest and seemed to enjoy it. But on top of that, you have to add the cold today. So I was sitting in the cold at home looking at the weather out there, and in my head I could actually remember how much more you feel every bump and smother on your fingers and your hands on the footy field on days like this. So yeah, really impressive. And I've got really big confidence in the future that Gross will have. Next best for me was a tough call between Jaden Hunt and Campbell Chesser, because they both had distinctly bigger impacts in separate halves of the game. Jaden Hunt was really damaging for us in the first half, still finishing with a decent second half, while Campbell Chesser got better as the game went on, and he really imposed himself on the contest by the time that second half was wrapped up. I think I have to go with Campbell Chester though, just because by the end of the match he really pushed his way into the top of our table, and his quieter half. So his first half was probably better than Hunt's quieter half, which was Hunt's second half. I hope I haven't lost you with that little convoluted sentence. The same strengths I keep saying about Chester were on show again today. His class with the ball in hand stood out, even in the wet, and he used his pace really well, creating space whenever he got his hands on it. Hunt stood out dominating the first half. He had a lot of the footy. He gained a lot of ground, which isn't a recorded stat in the WAFL, but it was very obvious. And he put a goal on the board too while he was during the middle of that dominant period of his. Like I said, his second half did take some of the shine off his impact early. I'm not sure what the reason was, and you don't really get to track every player as easily in WAFL matches. You don't have the commentary and the stats and all the other sort of, I suppose, supporting information that you would with the AFL to know exactly who was where and why they were moved around. But he looked the best he's been in weeks during the period that he was on, turning it on, by the way. Fourth, I'm going to also put Jacob Newton in my best today. He's really electric as a medium forward, kicked a really classy goal early and finished with 17, which is a really good number for a deep forward role, which is what he played a lot of the time for today. I did see him up the ground a few times, but he was the deep forward role for a lot of the day. I should probably add special mentions to Harvey Johnston, who really lifted in the fourth quarter during that period that the game went up in intensity. Locke Rawlinson had his best game this year with 2 goals, and Petch and Hamish Davies both were really consistent all day as well. For my promising performances, there was a really exciting announcement for West Coast that our father-son prospect, Charlie Banfield, debuted for the WAFL Eagles, kicking a great set shot goal later, and he worked his way into the game as it went on. He's in his draft year right now, and he played really well for WA during their win over Vic Country at the start of the Under-18s Carnival, so that was a while ago now. And I think as a bid prospect for us in the draft this year, it's going to be really exciting watching him for hopefully the rest of the WAFL fixture this year, if this wasn't a one-off game, which I don't think it will be. I think he's probably going to be playing some footy with us for the next few weeks. Other than that, my best WAFL-listed players was Shannon Lacasson right at the top. He was really impressive across the middle today. He's probably in our better players overall as well. Harley Sparks did a lot as usual and was really physical with a very aggressive Peel side, so he gave it back really well. And Caleb Datson had one of his best games this year, 2 down back, which pretty much brings me to my key takeaways. And my key takeaway, the one key takeaway, is something that I have mentioned earlier this year. That is that with both Bailey Williams and Matt Flynn playing together in the AFL side, we are desperately exposed in the ruck at WAFL level. Obviously, we're up against one of the better rucks in the competition today, and it did expose us a little bit more than usual. I'm not saying the tail needs to be wagging the dog and that our WAFL needs should come first over the AFL, because I do think it's been almost necessary for us to play both of our rucks just to compete with some of the top tier rucks of the AFL competition. But yeah, it's an issue, and we're a very different side without either of them in our WAFL squad. And that's just on the comparison of the first few rounds of the year where we did pick either Matt Flynn or Bailey Williams, and the other was in the WAFL absolutely carving it up, dominating the opposition rucks. But on that note, I have a really strong suspicion that West Coast will be taking Cooper, Duff, Tyler in the draft this year, quite possibly with our very first pick. So it'll be exciting to see him next year if we do. He's been described, and I will cover this in our draft videos a bit later on in the year, but he's been described as a very Luke Jackson style player who is really good at ground level. He's only 200 centimetres at the moment, but 17, you'd hope a little bit taller. And I won't get too caught up in that in one of my WAFL reviews, but I do think next year we shouldn't quite be as thin for ruck stocks as we are at the moment. Otherwise, that pretty much leaves my predictions for the coming week. And at the top of my list, I think Tom Gross is pressing his case for the AFL harder than anyone. He's been pretty consistent in the WAFL, but this week was back at that level that says he should be at the front of the queue. My next prediction is probably going to go down well with one of our subscribers, Ben, and along with a few mixed letters beside his name that I'm not going to try and read out, commented that he'd like to see our small forwards swap out for Malachi Champion and Jacob Newton to both get a run next week. And while I'd be a little surprised to see 2 changes in just one part of the ground over 1 week, I do think that either of those guys could be a chance to play next week after how they both performed in the WAFL. Right now, I'd say Newton has his nose in front for that opportunity next week's against Melbourne, and that could be a debut, yet another debutant for us. Third, I also think Campbell Chesser is right in the running to get a call up. He keeps playing consistent, impressive footy, and today was another high disposal game to go with all those damaging AFL attributes that he's got. So yeah, I'd personally love to see him get a game or two towards the end of the season, especially since his contract does run out, I think, at the end of this year. And then other than those names, you might argue that Jaden Hunt is a chance too. But it'll be interesting to see how many changes we do make this Thursday because, like I said in my Derby review last night, I didn't think that we played too badly as a side, but that doesn't mean that there weren't a couple of guys who left themselves a little bit vulnerable to being pushed out. Anyway, that pretty much wraps up my review of the Waffle today and my reviews for the weekend in general. So if you're not already a subscriber, please consider hitting that subscribe button as we may be near to the end of the AFL season, but there's still a ton of draft and off-season content that I'll be putting out beyond round 24. So other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the reviews this weekend, and I look forward to seeing you all again next round. Cheers until then.